Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
And that's why today I'm very pleased to cast my vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. A new working group has been created here at the state capitol to develop recommendations and plans to address cell service gaps in rural communities of upstate New York. Joining me to discuss this issue is Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, parts of Albany and Schenectady counties, and all of Montgomery County. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today.
Thanks, Liz. It's great to be here to talk about this.
It's a very important topic, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, you have extensive background in civil engineering and also represent many of these rural communities that we're discussing. And there is a huge lack of adequate cell service in these areas. And as a result of your experience, you have been appointed a member of this Upstate New York Cellular Coverage Task Force. So first of all, why don't you tell us about the task force and what its goals are?
Well, it's clearly this is an upstate issue that we're trying to address here, and something that's been talked about for quite some time. It's nothing new. What the task force was assembled for with a goal in mind of actually finding out where these gaps are, where they actually exist out there, where cell phones are working, where they are not. Because what we're finding is that the maps that have been provided that show the coverage in some of these areas, some of the rural communities we're talking about, and I represent all of Montgomery County. Even when I get into Waynesburg, I lose coverage. Even on GPS, and in this day and age, we come to rely on its basic communication, basic tool. I don't even know if some households even have landlines anymore. In some areas, I hear they're not even available. They're not making them available anymore because everybody's gone to cell service. But if you don't have the service, then what good is that? So we're part of our goal is to find out where the gaps are. That's going to involve actually physically going out to these areas and checking the signal, because the work we've done so far, we find that it just doesn't match up. Some areas are showing they have service. You get out there, you check, there's no signal. That's an issue. We discussed a lot of things in this first meeting that we had not too long ago. There'll be a number of other meetings to update what's happening on this task force. But one of the things that people talked about is that some communities felt like they had better service in the past than they do now. Some people had service and they lost service. So the goal of the task force is to identify the issues, bring partners together, carriers, local providers, the agencies that regulate a lot of this, what regulations are needed, what is needed for permitting, if it involves installing new towers, but also the environmental groups, bringing them in on day one to identify how we can streamline the process to actually get this very important service to the communities that need them. And
how is the progress going so far?
Well, we had our first meeting, as I said. We have a couple of other meetings to regroup and update. The good news about this is that there's industry experts, community leaders, government officials. The task force is made up of a number of a variety of people that have something to offer. I represent a lot of these communities that we're talking about, but hopefully everybody has particular areas they can focus on, and then bring all that back to the table to come up with a plan that we can implement in the near future. We're looking to produce a report on recommendations by November 1st. So it's a pretty aggressive schedule, but this is an issue it's long overdue. We should have cell phone coverage where we need it. You think about what you need a cell phone for. I just mentioned GPS. What's the first thing you do when you get in the car? You plug in where you're going, and you think about something that people are used to at this point. We don't want to have to go back to pulling out a map in the car to try and route something. So you depend on GPS. You depend on, what about, you mentioned kids. My kids play sports. My son's away at school. My daughter's coming home late. What's the first thing you want to do? Let me check. Let me see if they're okay. I want to make sure they're safe. I want to make sure they got a ride home. You want to check in on your loved ones. What happens if you go do that and the phone doesn't work? Now what? That's a real issue, and it really needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. It needs to be addressed, so we hope to get this report done by November 1st. We have several other meetings, a lot of work to do, but it's aggressive schedule because come this session, we got to start implementing some plans or get something in place then for the next session. If we need additional legislation, whatever the case may be, the agencies will make recommendations on what we can do to expedite this process. We really need to pull that report together so people can get it in the hands of the decision makers so that people can get on board with this plan to provide coverage. One of the things I didn't mention is, what about making a 911 call, an emergency call, where you need to contact the police or a fire department. Without cell coverage, it makes it very difficult. And, I mentioned my parents, even my parents at this point, they have cell phones, and they had a landline for a very long time, but they've gone to, it's just a basic tool now. Everybody has a cell phone. My parents, every generation now. So it's very important that we stay on schedule. So I hope we can do that.
And what are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, there's a lot happening right now with broadband discussions happening. It's closely related to the cell service. We're finding that there's what I just mentioned, areas that once had coverage, once had good cell service, come to find out now it seems to have deteriorated or not available anymore. So, what are some of the factors? Some of the things we talked about, foliage, trees growing, that can affect the signal. We talk about farmland, different seasons, different things in the fields where, when it's clear. We talked about the geographical challenges, valleys, mountains. I talk about Montgomery County, the terrain changes. So people talk about where, they have service, and if you go a few miles, there's no service. So these are things that they have brought to my attention. The main thing is, I had service one time, I don't, or, I have service at the school, and then I get home, and I don't have service. So you hear about the issues I just talked about. It's kind of scary if you need to make an emergency call and you can't do that. And as I said, some companies now don't even provide a landline service. It's just not used enough anymore. So it's pretty consistent that the rural areas are experiencing these issues. But it's also, areas like the Northway has always been brought up of, how far can you go before you don't have service anymore? And we've heard about that's made the news many times when it comes to making emergency calls. Some of the challenges that we're facing, as I just mentioned, foliage at certain times of the year, but we have to figure out how to overcome that. There's things out there that we can do. There's new technology. We have industry experts on this task force. We can come up with a solution. In this day and age, we have enough technology out there to be able to package it together to get coverage everywhere in the state.
Any personal experiences?
Yeah, well, one of the things, it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things I've gone through is I had service at one point where I live in a rural part of Rotterdam, town of Rotterdam, Schenectady County, not far from Duanesburg, where I feel like I had service, and now I can't make a call anywhere near the house. I find myself running around the backyard to try and get a signal sometimes, and there's really no explanation. And when you call the carrier, you call the service, they tell you you got service, you have service, no problem. But here I am, I don't have service. So something has happened. Something that happened. It needs to be. We really need to flush out what's happening here. If there's service, why is that service diminished at this point? So I go back to the carriers. We need to find. We need to hold companies accountable. They're saying there's service out there. You need to provide the service. And we're going to be prepared to show data that disputes their coverage maps to say, look, you're saying there's service here, but yet we don't have service. So these companies, people pay for a service. You need to be held accountable to those maps. And I have a estimated coverage map here, and you can see a lot of the blue.
Right.
You can see there's a lot of areas that just aren't covered. But the areas in blue, they say they have coverage. Some of those areas don't have coverage either. So it's a real problem. And this is what I'm hearing from people. That, hey, I can't make a call. I can't call my son or daughter at school. I got to check in on my parents, my elderly parents. I can't do that. So these are the real impacts of this that I'm hearing from my constituents.
Now, what are some of the challenges you see with addressing this issue?
Well, I mentioned a few of them, and it's good that we have a pretty diverse task force. So we have people on board from day one. The challenges, getting through regulation, local agencies, we have them on board to figure out how we can streamline this process so we're not caught up in that. We have environmental groups on board, so we're not caught up in that issue as well, so we can work out any details in this task force, so that when we come up with the report, we could talk about a path that can be achieved in a short period of time. Some of the other challenges, as I said, the low density areas. That's always a challenge.
Right.
You know, low density areas, farmland. It's always a challenge of broadband. Same here. You know, there's only so many towers that are out there, and some of these hills, some of these valleys, the mountainous areas, as you know, that's where you tend to lose coverage. But you know, there's new technology out there too. So hopefully we can implement some of that where we don't necessarily have to put up new towers, but we can utilize some of the broadband infrastructure, some of the things that have already been put in place through that program.
Yeah, and you were in Schenectady recently to talk about this smart street lighting technology.
That leads right into that, and some of the new technology I'm talking about is exactly that, is smart street lighting. They're essentially not towers, but they're smaller devices that can connect to the towers and can actually improve coverage in certain areas. Because you know, when the density increases in an area, you know, you need more frequency. You got to have the towers to be able to provide that, rather than putting up a new tower. In the city of Schenectady, what we're seeing is the smart street lighting. So we're seeing smart street lighting that are able to carry signals like that and boost these signals and be able to provide service to more people, better quality. That type of technology is available, and you know, I can see a plan where we put some of this infrastructure into villages and towns where, yes, it looks like a street light, but it has technology built into it. So it's not a large cell tower, but it has the ability to communicate, to boost these signals, to provide better coverage and fill in these gaps. So I'm thinking that with the technology, that may be something, you know, we'll talk about more as the task force continues.
It definitely sounds like a way to go. I mean, it's...
Yeah, and I'm sure people, you know, maybe didn't even notice in Schenectady that these towers are, you know, these street lights are smart street lights.
Yeah.
They're Wi-Fi capable. They can carry signals. They can do a number of things that, you know, technology is changing very quickly, and that's why it's time to have this task force meet and come together and come up with a good plan.
Well, a lot of people complain about how ugly those, you know, cell towers are. And they're
Yeah.
like, you know, not in my backyard kind of thing, but something similar to a street light.
That's been an issue in the past, certainly. You know, part of it will be, look, establishing the right radio, you know, the service, the radio frequencies that we need, the engineering that goes into it, building, you know, what are we going to need to build, what technology is going to have to be included in certain areas to be able to get a good signal. Site selection, you know, I'm a civil engineer. I always talk about site selection, picking a good area where we can install maybe new infrastructure, where we can get the most coverage. So the task force will be looking at that. And of course, funding. It all comes down to funding. So we've got to talk about funding sources, whether that's a combination of federal sources, whether it's the carriers, whether the state's going to be doing something on this, and the operations. You know, we have to maintain these sites. Once you put it up, there's operational costs that go with it. So it's going to be a very comprehensive package when this report comes out. I'm happy to see, you know, this initiative. Again, it's an upstate issue. I'm happy to see attention is being paid to this issue. It's important. It's important to our communities. And just because you live in a rural area shouldn't mean that you're cut off from the rest of the world. You don't have access to basic technology, basic communication. It shouldn't be that way. And we're looking to turn that around. And I'm pleased to be a part of this task force that's going to lead the way on getting some information to the legislature, to industry, the industry itself, to work with them in partnership to find out, to come up with a plan that we can implement and expedite and do it in a short period of time.
And of course, if anybody has any questions or concerns, or they can reach out to your office.
You can always reach out. They can stay up to date on the progress of the task force when that report is issued. I'll be giving a summary of that. But I can always find me on my website, nyassembly.gov, under Assemblyman Angela Santabarbara, or they can always call my office. But on my website, they can sign up for a newsletter where I can also provide information on this and other issues that will come up during the next session.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.